They said 60 guests like it was a punchline. A tent and 40 chairs? Honestly, I've seen bigger birthday parties. Diane's voice carried across the reception hall, pitched just loud enough. Bree laughed beside her, swirling wine she hadn't paid for. I mean, it's charming. In a thrift store kind of way. I stood by the folding chairs, clipboard in hand, and said nothing. This is where the story about my wedding actually starts, not with vows, but with a laugh I wasn't supposed to hear. If you've ever had someone try to shrink your happiest day down to nothing, you already know where this is going. Stay to the end. I call it revenge exposed now, because by the time I was done, there were receipts for everything. Mark found me a few minutes later, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Hey. You okay? He asked, not quite meeting my eyes. Your mom just compared our wedding to a kid's birthday party, I said. In front of the caterer. He winced, but only slightly. Relax, it's just Diane being Diane. She doesn't mean anything by it. I wanted to believe that. I really did. 6 months earlier, when Mark proposed, his mother had hugged me so tightly I thought she meant it. She'd cried, actually cried, and said she'd always wanted a daughter. I remember thinking I'd finally found the family I'd been missing since my father died. That memory felt very far away, standing in that hallway. She's been saying things like this since we picked the venue, I said. Small things. But they add up. She's stressed about the wedding too, you know, Mark said. Everyone's stressed. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I thought about the venue, a converted barn with string lights and 40 chairs, exactly enough for the people who actually mattered to us. I'd chosen it because it felt honest. Because after losing my dad, big and loud didn't feel like celebration anymore. It felt like noise. I'm not stressed, Mark. I'm paying attention. He sighed, the kind of sigh that meant he'd rather talk about literally anything else. Can we not do this right now? My mom's about to give the venue tour. I let it go. That was my first mistake, and also the last time I let something go without writing it down. Later that evening, back at my apartment, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my phone. There was a group text thread, Mark, Diane, Bree, and the wedding planner, that I'd been quietly added to a week ago and then, apparently, quietly removed from. I only knew because Bree had texted me a screenshot by accident, meaning to send it to someone else. Just for a second. Just enough for me to see 3 words that stopped my breath. Guest list, final? Followed by a name I didn't recognize. Then another. Then a note from Diane, trust me, better this way. I stared at that message for a long time. My hands felt cold, the way they do in early winter before your body remembers what cold actually means. I set my phone down, picked it back up, and took a screenshot of my own. I didn't know yet what I was looking at. But something in me, the part that had learned, the hard way, to notice when people were quietly rearranging your life without asking, told me to save it anyway. I created a folder. I named it simply, Wedding. It felt silly, almost paranoid, doing that. Diane was going to be my mother-in-law. Families didn't need receipts. But my father used to say something to me, back when I was 12 and convinced everyone around me was exactly as kind as they seemed. Claire, the ones who tell you not to worry are usually the ones you should worry about most. I hadn't understood him then. I was starting to now. The next morning, I called the venue coordinator, just to confirm our numbers hadn't changed. She hesitated before answering, the kind of pause that tells you more than words do. There was a call, she said carefully. About possibly adjusting the seating. I didn't make any changes without your approval, though. I just wanted to flag it. Who called? A woman named Diane. She said she was handling logistics for the family. I thanked her, hung up, and sat very still in my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, feeling something settle low in my chest. Not panic. Something quieter and more permanent. Resolve. If Diane wanted to play logistics, she'd taught me, without meaning to, exactly what kind of bride she was going to need me to become. I opened my messages and texted my old friend from law school, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Hey. Random question. Do you still do family and contract law? 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Always. What's going on? I looked at the screenshot still open on my phone, the guest list with names I didn't recognize, the message that said trust me. I typed back 4 words that would end up changing everything. I think I need help. 2 days later, I found out Diane hadn't just adjusted the seating chart. She'd removed 12 names from my site entirely. My aunt. My college roommate. The woman who'd taught me to drive after my father couldn't anymore. I found this out not from Diane, but from my aunt herself, who called me confused, holding an invitation that had never arrived. Sweetheart, did we do something wrong? She asked, and I could hear the hurt underneath the question, careful and small. No, I said. You didn't do anything. I'm going to fix this. I called Diane immediately, my hand steadier than I expected. Why did you remove 12 people from my guest list? I asked, no preamble. I only moved a few names, don't be so sensitive, she said, like I'd caught her rearranging furniture instead of erasing my family. The venue has a cap. Someone had to be practical. The venue cap was never the issue. You removed my people and kept yours. Claire. Her voice shifted, softened into something that used to work on me. I was trying to help. Weddings are complicated. You're young, you don't understand budgets the way I do. I felt the old pull to apologize, to smooth things over the way I always had. I didn't. Add them back today, I said. Or I will. She didn't answer that. She just changed the subject, asked about flowers, and I let her, because I already had what I needed. I opened my email and forwarded every message from the venue coordinator to my own private account. Then I forwarded Diane's texts to myself too, one by one, quietly building a record I hoped I'd never actually need. That afternoon, Bree showed up at my apartment unannounced, holding a coffee she hadn't asked if I wanted. I heard you and Mom had words, she said, settling onto my couch like she owned it. She erased my family from my own wedding. She's just trying to keep the peace. You know how she gets. Bree took a sip, studying me over the rim of the cup. It's sweet you're trying so hard with so little, honestly. This whole small wedding thing. It's very you. The comment landed exactly where she meant it to. I thought of my father again, the way I'd been thinking of him more and more lately, like grief had learned to live quietly in the corners of ordinary days. He would have walked me down that aisle in the barn with the string lights, and he would have thought it was perfect, because he never once cared what things looked like from the outside. Small doesn't mean less, I said. It means chosen. Bree shrugged, unbothered, and changed the subject to her own dress fitting. That evening, I told Mark everything, the guest list, the coordinator's call, Diane's excuses. He listened with his jaw tight, but when I finished, he still reached for the explanation that required the least from him. She probably just got overwhelmed, he said. You know she means well. Mark, she lied to a vendor and cut my aunt from our wedding. That's not overwhelmed. That's deliberate. You're imagining things, Claire. He said it gently, which somehow made it worse. She's excited. She wants everything perfect for us. I looked at him for a long moment, searching for the version of him that used to notice things before I had to explain them. I need you to actually talk to her, I said. Not for me. For yourself. Ask her why she thought she had the right. He promised he would. I believed him, mostly because I wanted to. That night, alone, I pulled out an old photo of my father from our last Christmas together, the two of us laughing at something I couldn't even remember anymore. My throat tightened, the familiar ache rising before I could stop it. He wouldn't be at the ceremony. No amount of guest list drama could change that fact, and some days it felt like the only thing that actually mattered. I ran my thumb along the edge of the photograph, smoothing a crease that wasn't really there, and made myself a quiet promise. I'm not losing anything else I don't have to. I opened my phone one more time before bed and added everything from the day into my folder. The screenshots. The call log. A short note about what Bree had said, timestamped, precise. It felt less like paranoia now, and more like armor. Somewhere underneath the hurt, something steadier was starting to take shape, not anger exactly, but its calmer, more patient cousin. I didn't know yet how far Diane was willing to go. But I was starting to understand that whatever happened next, I wasn't going to walk into it unprepared. My lawyer friend's name was Priya, though this time she wasn't just Priya, she was Priya Chen, attorney, and she met me at a small coffee shop 3 blocks from her office with a legal pad and a look I recognized from law school, the one she used to get right before she found the flaw in someone's argument. "Walk me through everything," she said. Slowly. I did. The guest list. The vendor calls. The comment about budgets. Priya wrote steadily, occasionally stopping to ask a question that made me realize I'd missed something important. "Has anyone mentioned your finances? Prenup, joint accounts, anything like that?" I paused. "Actually, yes. Mark mentioned last week that his mom thought we should combine accounts before the wedding. For simplicity." Priya's pen stopped moving. "That's not simplicity, Claire. That's positioning." "Positioning for what?" "For if things go wrong. Or for control while things are going right." She tapped the pad. "Do you have a prenup drafted? We were supposed to sign one next week." "Get me a copy before you sign anything," she said. "I want to see who wrote it." I found out that evening that Diane herself had recommended the lawyer who drafted it. Mark called me that night to talk about seating arrangements, and I asked him, as casually as I could manage, why his mother had picked our prenup attorney. "She knows him from church," Mark said. "He's supposed to be good." "Good for who?" "Claire, come on. She's just trying to help us not make mistakes." I didn't argue. I just listened to him talk about candles and centerpieces, and underneath the conversation, I recorded it, not because I distrusted him exactly, but because I'd learned that memory bends toward comfort, and I needed something that wouldn't. I saved the voice memo in the folder, timestamped, alongside everything else. The next call came from Diane herself, 2 days later, and this one I didn't record on purpose. I simply forgot to hang up my phone properly after answering, and it kept recording in my pocket as I set it down on the counter. "I just think Mark deserves someone who understands family money," she said, her voice light, like she was discussing weather. "Not everyone comes from that world, and that's fine, but it means certain adjustments have to be made. For protection." His protection. What kind of adjustments? Small things. A trust structure. Some accounts staying separate in ways that make sense for the family. "I didn't say that to hurt you," she added quickly, sensing something in my silence. "I said it because it's true." I picked the phone back up, my palm cold against the metal case. "I'll have my lawyer look at whatever paperwork you're suggesting." There was a pause on the line, brief but telling. "You have a lawyer?" "I do now." She recovered smoothly, laughed it off, said something about being overly cautious mothers being a family trait. But I heard it, the small crack in her voice before she caught herself. That was the moment I understood this wasn't about seating charts anymore. I met Priya again the next day, and this time I brought the recording. She listened twice, her expression unreadable, then finally set the phone down. "This is enough to be concerning," she said. "Not enough to act on publicly yet. But enough to prepare." "Prepare how?" "Document everything. Every conversation, every email, every attempt to change financial arrangements without your knowledge. If this escalates, you'll want a clear record." Receipts. That word settled into me differently than it had before, not as something petty or vindictive, but as protection. As the only language some people actually respected. I started keeping everything after that. Every text. Every recorded call. Every strange coincidence that Diane insisted was nothing. 2 days before the rehearsal dinner, Bree called me, her voice different than I'd heard it before, less performance, more static. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to not tell my mom I told you." "Okay." "There was a bottle of red wine that accidentally got knocked over near your dress bag last week." "It wasn't an accident." My stomach dropped. "What?" "I'm not saying more than that. I'm just saying, maybe keep a backup somewhere. Just in case." I thanked her, hung up, and sat with the strange, unfamiliar feeling of Bree actually trying to help me. That afternoon, I quietly bought a second dress, simpler, less expensive, but mine, and had it shipped to my own apartment instead of the one Mark and I shared. I told no one except Priya. "Good instinct," she said, when I mentioned it. "Always have a version of the day that doesn't depend on anyone else's cooperation." That night, I lay awake replaying every conversation of the past 2 weeks, the laughter at the venue, the guest list, the trust language, the wine that wasn't an accident. None of it, on its own, was enough to prove anything. Together, it was starting to look like a pattern. I thought of my father again, the way he used to say that patience wasn't about waiting quietly, it was about waiting ready. I didn't know exactly what I was preparing for yet. But for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like I was only reacting. I felt like I was finally a step ahead. I met Priya at her office the following week, and this time she had a folder of her own, thin, but heavier than it looked. "I pulled the draft prenup Diane's attorney sent over," she said, sliding it across the desk. "You should see page 4. I read it twice before the words fully landed. Buried in careful legal language was a clause granting Diane's family trust partial control over any joint property acquired during the marriage, control that would default to her, not Mark, in the event of certain family decisions. "This isn't protecting Mark," I said slowly. "This is protecting her." "It's designed to look routine," Priya said. "Most people wouldn't catch it. I only caught it because you told me who suggested the attorney." I sat back, feeling something cold settle where the shock used to be. Not despair anymore. Something quieter, harder-edged. "I need to talk to Mark," I said. "Really talk to him." I asked him to meet me that evening, away from wedding planning, away from his mother's orbit. We sat in my apartment, the same kitchen table where all of this had started weeks ago. "I need you to actually hear me," I said. "Not manage me. Not explain her away. Just hear me." I laid it out plainly, the guest list, the wine, the trust clause Priya had found. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Mark read through the marked-up prenup pages in silence, his jaw working the way it did when he was trying not to feel something. "She told me this was standard language," he said finally, quietly. "I didn't read it closely. I trusted her." "I know you did." "That's not a crime, Mark. But this is a choice now. You know what this is. What are you going to do about it?" He didn't answer right away, and in that silence I felt something in me brace for the worst. "I need to think," he said eventually. "I need to talk to her myself." It wasn't the answer I wanted. But it was, at least, the first time he hadn't simply defended her on instinct. "You have one more chance to choose me over her comfort," I said. "I mean that. Not as a threat. As the truth." He left that night without resolving anything, and I sat alone in the quiet apartment, my resolve wavering for the first time since this began. I thought about calling off the wedding entirely. Just for an hour, I let myself imagine it, the relief of walking away from all of it, the guest list and the trust clauses and the years of Diane's careful control. I picked up my father's old watch from my dresser, the one I still hadn't figured out how to wear without aching, and turned it over in my hands. The ones who tell you not to worry are usually the ones you should worry about most. He'd never met Mark. He'd never met Diane. But some warnings outlive the people who give them. I put the watch down, and instead of calling off the wedding, I called Priya. "I need to know exactly what my options are," I said. Not to end things. To protect myself either way. Smart, she said. Let's talk through it. We spent 2 hours going over scenarios. What happened if I signed the prenup as written? What happened if I didn't sign at all? What evidence would matter if things escalated publicly? By the end of the call, I didn't feel afraid anymore. I felt equipped. 2 days later, Bree called again, her voice tight with something that sounded almost like guilt. My mom wants to give a toast at the rehearsal dinner, she said. A real one. She's been rehearsing it in the mirror. Since when does Diane rehearse toasts? Since she found out you hired a lawyer. Bree paused. I think she's planning something, Claire. I don't know what. But I've never seen her like this. Thank you for telling me. I won't lie for her at the altar. Not this time, Bree said, and I heard something break loose in her voice, something that had been holding on too long. I'm tired of covering for things I don't actually believe in. After we hung up, I sat with that for a long moment, surprised by how much it mattered, hearing Bree finally choose a side. I texted Priya one line before bed, rehearsal dinner. Diane's planning a toast. I think this is where it happens. Her reply came quickly. Then we make sure you're ready for it. I didn't sleep much that night. But for the first time in weeks, the sleeplessness wasn't dread. It was readiness. The rehearsal dinner was held in a small private room above the restaurant Mark had proposed in, string lights strung low across exposed beams. 20 of our closest people gathered around 2 long tables. Diane stood at the head of the room, wine glass raised, radiant in a way that should have warned me sooner. Let's be honest, she began, smiling out at the room, this isn't the wedding anyone expected for my son. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the tables, the kind people make when they're not sure if it's a joke. Mark could have had anyone, she continued. Anyone at all. But love makes fools of even the smartest men, doesn't it? I felt every eye in the room shift toward me, and beneath the table, I pressed my palm flat against my thigh, steadying my breath the way Priya had taught me. Let her finish. Let her show everyone exactly who she is. I only want what's best for my son, Diane went on, her voice warm and terrible. And sometimes that means asking hard questions. Like why a grown woman doesn't have a real career. Why her own family is so small. Mom, that's enough. Mark's voice cut across the room, sharper than I'd heard it in weeks. I mean it. Diane blinked, genuinely startled, as if she hadn't expected pushback from the one person who'd always given her none. The room went quiet. I felt heat rising up my neck, my pulse loud in my own ears, and beside me, unnoticed by most of the room, Priya set her hand briefly on my shoulder, steady, grounding, a small anchor in the middle of it all. Bree stood up before anyone else could speak. She's been planning this since the engagement, Claire, Bree said, her voice shaking but clear. The guest list, the wine, the prenup lawyer. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. Gasps moved quietly through the room. Diane's face shifted, the warmth draining into something colder, more exposed. Bree, don't you dare, Diane said. I'm done not daring, Bree said, and sat back down, hands trembling slightly in her lap. Diane turned back to the room, attempting to recover her composure, her smile brittle now around the edges. I think emotions are running a little high tonight. Weddings do that. No, I said, finally standing, my voice steadier than I expected. This isn't emotions. This is a pattern. And I have documentation of every part of it, going back weeks. The room fell utterly silent. Diane's eyes flicked to Priya beside me, recognition dawning slow and unwelcome. You brought your lawyer to a family dinner, she said, and for the first time, her voice lost its polish entirely. I brought someone who tells me the truth, I said. Since apparently that's been in short supply. Mark stood, moving to stand beside me, his hand finding mine. I read the prenup clause, Mom, he said quietly. I know what you tried to do. I don't understand why you thought I wouldn't notice, or that I wouldn't care. Diane's composure cracked fully then, just for a moment, a flash of something raw beneath the careful performance she'd maintained for weeks. "Everything I did to protect this family," she said, quieter now. "You don't understand what it's like to build something and watch someone else walk in." She stopped herself before finishing the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone in the room understood exactly what she meant. I felt something in my chest loosen, not triumph exactly, but clarity. The mask was finally off, and underneath it wasn't the mysterious, calculated villain I'd half expected. It was fear, dressed up as control, the way it so often is. That didn't make it forgivable. But it made it, finally, understandable enough to stop doubting myself. The dinner ended early, tense and unfinished, but something had shifted permanently in that room. Bree caught my eye on her way out and gave me a small, exhausted nod, the first honest thing she'd offered me in weeks. Mark walked me to my car afterward, quiet for a long time before he spoke. "I'm sorry it took me this long," he said. "I should have listened the first time you told me something felt wrong." "You're listening now," I said. "That's what matters." He nodded, and for the first time since this had all started, I let myself believe that the man I was marrying and the man standing in front of me were, finally, the same person. 2 days remained before the wedding. Diane's toast hadn't been the ending she'd planned. But it wasn't the ending of the story either. The morning of the wedding was quiet in a way that felt earned, sunlight moving gold across the barn's wooden beams, string lights still glowing faintly from the night before. 40 chairs. My people, all of them, finally exactly where they belonged. I stood in the small dressing room adjusting my veil, my father's watch fastened carefully around my wrist for the first time, the leather worn soft from years of his own hands. Priya knocked once and stepped inside, dressed simply, a folder tucked discreetly into her bag. "You don't have to do this," she said gently. "If you don't want to." "I want to marry Mark," I said. "I just don't want to marry him pretending none of this happened." She nodded, understanding exactly what I meant, and slipped quietly toward the back of the barn to wait. The ceremony began exactly on time. 40 faces turned to watch me walk down a short aisle lined with wildflowers instead of orchids, simple and honest, the kind of beautiful that didn't need an audience of hundreds to mean something. Mark stood waiting, his eyes finding mine and staying there. The officiant moved through the ceremony steadily, warmly, until she reached the moment every wedding holds its breath for. "If anyone has reason why this couple should not be joined, speak now." Diane rose from her seat before the words had fully settled into the air. "I do have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying across the quiet room. A single collective gasp moved through the crowd, quickly hushed. "Before you say anything else, Diane," I said, calm and clear, "I think everyone should know what you tried to change 3 days before this wedding." I nodded to Priya, who stepped forward from the back of the room, folder in hand. "On the 12th, Priya said, her voice level and precise, a prenuptial agreement was submitted containing a clause granting the Whitmore family trust discretionary control over jointly acquired property. This clause was inserted without Claire's knowledge, by an attorney recommended by Diane Whitmore." Diane's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing without sound. "This isn't about humiliating anyone," I said, turning toward her. "This is about making sure everyone here understands why I needed a witness today who wasn't just standing up for love. I needed one standing up for the truth." "Mom." Mark's voice was steady now, entirely certain. "Sit down. This is over." Diane looked around the room, searching, I think, for someone who might still defend her. She found no one. Even Bree, seated near the front, simply held her gaze evenly until Diane's own faltered. Diane sat. A family member near the back, her own sister, quietly rose and gently guided Diane out of the room, murmuring something too low for the rest of us to hear. The door closed softly behind them. The officiant, composed and gracious, allowed a single breath of silence before speaking again. "Let's continue, if the bride is ready." "I'm ready," I said, and found that I meant it completely. The rest of the ceremony moved forward the way ceremonies are supposed to, full of small imperfections and real emotion, Mark's voice catching slightly on his vows, my own hands finally steady where they held his. If someone in your life has ever tried to shrink your happiest moments down to nothing, tell us in the comments. This is exactly why I built my case on justice, not just anger, and why the receipts mattered more than the noise ever did. By the time the officiant pronounced us married, the tension of the morning had softened into something gentler, the kind of relief that settles slowly rather than arriving all at once. Bree was the first to approach us afterward, her eyes red but her smile genuine. "I'm proud of you," she said to me, and then, quieter, to Mark, "both of you." Mark squeezed my hand as the small crowd rose to applaud, 40 voices instead of 200, every one of them real. The fabric of my veil settled still against my shoulders for the first time all day, and for the first time in weeks, so did I. We wrote our own vows, simple and short, the way everything about that day had ended up being. "I choose the people who show up quietly, not the ones who perform loudly," I said, watching Mark's eyes soften at the words. "You did the hard part, waking up to what was happening. The rest was easy." He laughed softly, pressing his forehead to mine for just a moment before the officiant continued. "And I choose you," he said, knowing now what that actually means. "Not just the easy parts." 40 people applauded when we kissed, the sound warm and unhurried, filling the barn the way string lights fill a room after dark, softly, completely. Afterward, during the first dance, I caught sight of Bree near the edge of the room, watching with an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not performance. Not doubt. Just quiet solidarity, a small nod passed between us across the space. Mark held me close as we turned slowly beneath the lights, and I felt my father's watch resting warm against my wrist, catching the glow for just a second. I thought of what he used to tell me, all those years ago, and finally understood it completely. Patience isn't about waiting quietly. It's about waiting ready. I'd been ready. And it had been enough. If someone in your life has ever tried to shrink your happiest moments down to nothing, tell us your story below. This has been Revenge Exposed now, and yours might be next.